Most Power Platform dashboards fall apart as soon as user roles get complex. What if I told you that a handful of overlooked integration points between Azure AD, Power BI, and Power Apps could transform a generic report into a tailored executive control center? Stick around to see why skipping a single step here could mean critical data ends up in the wrong hands, or worse, left unseen. Where role-based dashboards go wrong and why most fail early. If you've ever been on a dashboard rollout project where everyone swears they're on the same page until launch day, you already know where this is headed. Most teams dive in thinking a role-based dashboard just means organizing the right charts and picking the sharpest visuals. The focus is on DAX formulas, formatting, and those little color-coded KPIs, because that's how dashboards win over execs and demos. But this all starts to go sideways much earlier than you'd expect, long before anyone creates a single calculated column. Let's play out how this actually happens in the wild. Picture a company investing several weeks and a healthy chunk of its budget to deliver a platform everyone can use. The business wants a single dashboard where execs monitor big numbers, analysts slice into operational performance, and team leads keep tabs on their own groups. The build starts smoothly. Every stakeholder gets a say in what metrics show up on the main screen. It is looped in to set up the workspace, provision the right licenses, and block out a chunk of time for that first rollout. On day one, everything seems in order. The executive sees the pipeline overview, analysts get their regional breakdowns, and the team lead is happy with their staff metrics. For about 3 days, nobody raises a red flag. Then, right on cue, something weird slips through. A sales manager logs in and pulls up the dashboard, only to notice HR trending data sitting right next to their sales chart. At the same time, an analyst clicks a filter, but suddenly finds they're staring at numbers way outside their usual scope. Revenue information meant for upper management. You know what happens next. Slack and Teams blow up. It gets dragged into meetings. Someone references compliance risks. By this point, people already start to question what's safe to trust in the dashboard anyway. This mess rarely comes down to a bug or one faulty filter. More often, it's because the whole system was built on quicksand. The traps are subtle but everywhere. Admins assume the manager role means the same thing on the IT and business sides. Security groups get left as last-minute checklist items instead of core building blocks. No one ever sits down to write a clear map of which users exist, what access they really need, and how these groups align with business goals. So the moment the audience for the dashboard grows, even by a few people, errors creep in. Someone always ends up seeing information they shouldn't or missing key details. It's stunning how often projects miss this step. Think back to any failed dashboard rollout you've witnessed. There's always one common thread. Teams charge ahead on visuals and data models, skipping that first awkward conversation about who the user actually is in the context of the business. I remember watching a department dashboard land with a thud simply because nobody could agree on what leadership included. Was it just the C-suite? Did it mean anyone with direct reports? Each group, IT and business, used the same terms, but had completely different user lists in mind. The dashboard itself wasn't badly built. The logic just didn't match how people worked or what data they needed. You end up with dashboards that look impressive in a demo, but start to unravel during regular use. A basic assumption about what the analyst role gets to view blows open a compliance risk. The team lead security group doesn't mirror what's in the HR system, so real team leads can't see their numbers, but others can. Without a tight framework for mapping user identities to actual business needs and explicit security requirements, you're not just risking confusion. You're staring down audit failures, accidental leaks, and the slow drain of organizational trust in whatever you build next. Most failures aren't caused by tooling, they're caused by this gap between business language and technical controls. One team talks about managers picturing a layer in the org chart. Meanwhile, IT's working with Azure AD security groups named after outdated project teams. The disconnect seems harmless until someone from the old payroll group who left HR years ago still has access to sensitive budget dashboards because nobody updated the groups. There's never a single moment when it all breaks. Instead, you slowly wind up with dashboards that are more about policing access after the fact than enabling confident strategic decisions. The thing almost nobody tells you is that dashboards without a documented living role mapping framework, one that ties together user personas, group memberships, and data requirements, will always end up as a patchwork of ad hoc fixes. People throw more filters on, create duplicate workspaces for each audience, or even spin up extra reports with hidden tabs. That quick fix becomes a maintenance headache. Instead of empowering people, these dashboards start to feel risky, unreliable, and at best, just another thing to avoid. So if you take away just one point from this mess, it's this. You can design a dashboard that checks every box for visual appeal and calculations, and it's still going to bite you if you skip role clarity, security group alignment, and explicit mapping at the start. These mismatches don't just cause friction, they turn your dashboards into liabilities rather than assets. That's where the conversation moves from what data should people see to how do we even define who people are? The answer almost always starts not with colorful charts, but with the structure you've already got, Azure AD and security groups. And that backbone or lack of one sets up everything that follows. The secret language of Azure AD groups and Power BI security. If you've ever seen a security group called executives and thought, okay, that's sorted, and you might want to hold off on the victory lap. The reality is, security groups in Azure AD aren't just switches you flip. They sit at the center of a constant tug of war between business logic and real-world usage. Walk into any mid-sized company and you'll find someone on the IT team who swears they've locked down the dashboard, the right people in the right groups, Power BI permissions set, compliance checkboxes ticked. Then inevitably, there's that moment someone in operations, totally by accident, clicks into a dashboard and finds themselves peering at executive salary data or customer churn that should have stayed 2 floors up. Cue the awkward silence and scramble for answers. Why does this keep happening? Part of the issue is timing. Azure AD groups get out of sync with the pace of the business. When roles shift, group memberships should too, but manual updates end up on the back burner. Someone gets a promotion, moves teams, or leaves, but the group definitions drag their feet. And meanwhile, Power BI is often pointing at those same groups, assuming they're gospel. The scary part? Even well-meaning admin changes can wedge open new cracks. A user gets added to a group for a one-off project but never removed. Days or even months later, that person can still see sensitive dashboards they have no business accessing. Let's pull the curtain back on how Azure AD and Power BI actually interlock. At first glance, security groups look like they just control who can access dashboards or workspaces. Dig a little deeper and you realize they're actually framing the data story for every single user. The moment you map an Azure AD group to a role in Power BI, you create the rules for which rows someone can see, and crucially, which ones stay hidden. Most people picture permissions as a view button or a locked tab, but what's really happening is more like invisible filters sliding into place every time a user logs in. This brings us to one of those details that rarely shows up in the pitch decks. Row-level security in Power BI isn't about protecting a handful of sensitive columns buried deep in a model. What RLS really does is redraw the boundaries for the entire dashboard experience. So an executive might log in and see a handful of high-level KPIs, total revenue, top client trends, maybe a red warning if targets are slipping. Meanwhile, that same dashboard seen by an analyst flips open the hood, regional splits, product-level breakdowns, operational gap analysis. But, and this is the crucial twist, none of that dynamic tailoring works if the Azure AD groups and Power BI roles aren't walking in lockstep. Take an actual situation. An executive group and an analyst group both set up cleanly in Azure AD. The business says execs should see results for the whole company. Analysts get just their region. The Power BI admin creates 2 roles tied to those groups. It looks foolproof. Until a few months in, a new user joins the analyst team, except nobody updates the AD group. That person goes straight into the everyone group because onboarding is swamped. Suddenly, the entire row-level security structure falls apart for them. They see either far too much or a blank screen, depending on how the RLS rules were defined. What looked airtight on paper doesn't hold up in production because these mappings aren't self-healing and rarely get audited in real time. Where admins frequently get burnt is not by forgetting to set RLS, but by treating it like a one-time configuration. Business needs shift, org charts move around, but the back-end rules stay frozen. Or worse, someone tries to simplify the chaos by overloading groups and roles. Let's just add everyone who needs some dashboard access to this team, hoping the filters will pick up the slack. Before long, group membership starts resembling a junk drawer. Quick access for everyone, zero precision for anyone. Another trap sits in the technical handshake between Azure AD and Power BI itself. Most organizations think Adding a security group to a workspace means the same as assigning a role within the dataset. But under the hood, Power BI only enforces RLS when it's set within the dataset and assigned for viewing. So you can have an airtight executive group in your AD, but if it's just picking up workspace permissions not wired into Power BI's role configuration, users might see a sanitized version of the dashboard, but click just once and land in a data landscape that isn't meant for them. The hidden gem here, when you configure your AD groups and Power BI roles together, you unlock dynamic filtering that follows the user wherever they go. The second someone logs in, their group membership shapes the entire dashboard experience in real time, from which tabs show up to which metrics get highlighted. It's not about hiding a few rows, it's sculpting a persona-specific view built from the ground up. But as soon as you let group management slide or treat RLS as a back office afterthought, cracks appear. HR sees finance metrics, sales stumbles into IT service reports, and the dashboard's reputation tanks. The reality is Azure AD group design and Power BI RLS have to adapt together. Otherwise, exposure isn't just possible, it's guaranteed. And once you figure out how tightly those wires need to connect, you're left with a new challenge. When Power Apps steps in to personalize the experience, the complexity jumps again. How Power Apps reads user context and why it changes everything. A lot of people still walk into Power Apps thinking it's just a low-code layer. I'm only here for the buttons and forms. In reality, Power Apps steps in as the quiet gatekeeper, shaping not just how your dashboards look, but exactly what ends up in front of each pair of eyes. The assumption is that it's mostly window dressing, but under the hood, it's making judgment calls about every single metric, table, and visualization that gets through to the user. It doesn't broadcast what it's doing, but it's steering the experience in ways you rarely see spelled out in documentation. Let's run through what this looks like in the real world. You have a team lead and an executive, both accessing the same Power Apps dashboard for workforce planning. The team lead logs in and only sees performance stats for their area, active projects for their direct reports, and maybe a basic trend line on team capacity. Meanwhile, the exec opens up the exact same app and, without switching context or hunting for a different URL, gets a very different view. Total headcount, cross-team trends, big picture metrics the team lead never even has the option to click into. There's no menu labeled switch role. It just works, and most users never think twice about why. But this seamless magic depends on a surprisingly tangled web behind the scenes. Power Apps doesn't simply know who you are, it builds up that knowledge from several sources at once. First, there's the signed-in user profile, which Power Apps reads directly from Microsoft 365. You log in, and instantly your user principal name, job title, and email get funneled into variables within the app. Beyond the basics, it can go deeper by connecting to Microsoft Graph. That's where real muscle comes in. Now the app can look up which Azure AD groups you belong to, find your department, or even fetch custom properties defined in your user profile. Some organizations add more layers by tying in additional connectors like fetching security roles from Dynamics 365 or pulling flags from custom APIs. What comes next is where the Power Apps to Power BI handoff gets interesting. Once Power Apps establishes your identity and group memberships, it passes these details into any embedded Power BI report on the app's canvas. On the surface, it feels like nothing special. The report loads, the charts populate, life goes on. But every one of those context variables can silently drive slices, pre-filter visuals, or even cause entire report pages to hide or reveal themselves depending on who's looking. For instance, you might set up a process where Power Apps grabs the current user's department from Microsoft Graph and writes it into a Power BI filter. Now, every chart, graph, or KPI on the embedded report only shows numbers for that department. With just a quick refresh, the same app reshapes itself depending on whether the signer-in user is in sales, HR, or operations. I've seen this approach used to take personalization a step further. Let's say you want to show a feedback dashboard where only managers see their team engagement scores, but executives see aggregate stats. Power Apps checks the group memberships on login, and a variable flags manager or executive. When the app opens the Power BI report, those variables apply to dynamic filters and slices right at load. The team lead never even knows there's a page with org-wide analysis. No extra logins or toggles, just instant adaptation. Of course, there are potholes along this road. One big trap is assuming Power Apps logic alone is enough for security. You can beautifully tailor what each user sees in the app, but if you lose sync with what Power BI's row-level security is enforcing, cracks show up almost immediately. Maybe Power Apps thinks a user only sees their region, but the embedded Power BI report hasn't been locked down with matching RLS settings. The result? Sometimes users see more data than they should, or, just as annoying, get a cryptic error because the Power BI side doesn't recognize the filtering. The disconnect isn't obvious until someone files a ticket or, worse, a data leak comes up during audit. There's also the question of performance. All that dynamic personalization, pulling group info from Microsoft Graph, updating slicers, applying page level filters adds up. Pull too much at once, and the user waits while the app spins through queries and updates. Some organizations try to get clever and handle every possible persona in a single Power App, but as group memberships stack up and datasets get heavier, even fast connections start to strain under the load. The balance becomes how much context and tailoring you deliver before the experience drags. The difference between a dashboard people trust and one they abandon usually hinges on shaving those extra seconds and matching every single user context variable to the Power BI security models. So Power Apps is the back channel that quietly personalizes dashboards, but only if you keep every piece tightly aligned, from user profile to group membership, all the way into dynamic Power BI filters and RLS. Miss a link and the experience feels clunky or worse, unsafe. That's the secret weapon, context-driven dashboards that just make sense to whoever's logged in without ever needing to worry about switching views or chasing down permissions. It's magic when it works and a minefield when it doesn't. But all this dynamic control begs a question. As usage scales and teams reshape, how do you keep this layered model efficient and secure without endless manual fixes or constant troubleshooting? Scaling and securing the whole system, architectural decisions that make or break you. If you've ever rolled out a dashboard to a handful of handpicked users and thought that wasn't so bad, that feeling doesn't last. For small pilot groups, it's easy to keep the wheels turning. The real test hits the minute that dashboard gets linked in the company newsletter, or HR decides it's so useful that now 1,000 people should have a look. That first spike in logins exposes every weak spot you didn't know you had. Suddenly, reports hang on load, someone in marketing ends up emailing IT because they're shut out, and support tickets pile up from regions half your team forgot to include. The dashboard that looked rock solid goes wobbly as usage ramps up. Scaling a role-based dashboard is a different sport from just building one. The temptation is always to keep patching for each new audience, add a few more roles, duplicate a report for that oddball special team, maybe sneak in an extra page for finance leadership. It seems harmless until you're juggling half a dozen report variants with copy-paste logic scattered everywhere. That's when the headaches really start. One misunderstanding about a DAX filter in the team lead version breaks the executive dashboard. One missed group membership means someone suddenly gets no numbers at all. This is where dashboards become maintenance nightmares, and where half-baked fixes eventually pile up until you're one step away from just emailing spreadsheets again. Let's break out why these issues surface and what choices actually help you avoid them. First, if you want dashboards to flex as your org scales, your data model has to be built for multiple audiences from day one. That doesn't mean creating a separate tab or report for every minor variation. It means structuring your data sets so that role and department can drive filters and permissions directly. A modular Power BI data model doesn't bake filters into visuals. Instead, it shapes everything based on dynamic inputs. So when a new sales region appears or someone adds a new management tier, the model flexes without needing a redesign. In practice, that often means using lookup tables for user profiles, mapping user roles in advance, and designing RLS rules so they adapt instead of hard-coding access by name or team. Second, there's the question of how you manage group membership and automation. Organizations that rely on a weekly, can you add these 3 people to this group email are just waiting for things to break. Manual processes slip, especially when team structures or job roles change mid-quarter. The companies that manage to avoid turning group membership into a support ticket graveyard almost always invest in automation. That means leveraging dynamic group rules in Azure AD, membership defined by attributes like department or job title, not a running list in someone's inbox. The more group management gets automated, the less chance there is of someone slipping through the cracks, getting stuck with old permissions, or getting left behind during a reorg. Third piece of the puzzle is orchestrating Power BI and Power Apps to avoid systemic bottlenecks. Say you build a clever system where Power Apps reads every user's profile, reaches out to Microsoft Graph, then feeds that context into 6 different Power BI reports every time the app loads. It sounds great until real-world conditions hit. With 10 users, everything is instantaneous. At 100, report load times rise just enough to be noticeable. At 1,000, users wait, dashboards lag, and soon people stop trusting what they see. So orchestration isn't just about making it work. It's about making it fast, resilient, and predictable as usage climbs. This means building modular Power BI datasets that load only what's needed, optimizing Power Apps for targeted queries, and testing for performance at scale, not just in your own sandbox environment. Here's a real-world case study. One company running on manual group updates and duplicated reports spent 2 weeks every quarter cleaning up after access mishaps, rebuilding visuals, untangling permissions, and answering frantic emails about missing KPI numbers. In contrast, another org with automated dynamic group rules and modular datasets almost never had to touch their role assignments after initial setup. They spent that time refining metrics or adding features, not firefighting permissions. The gap grows as user counts rise. Fixing one-off issues by adding new roles or duplicating dashboards always backfires. A small change in your business structure means hours of repetitive updates and more places to miss something critical. To avoid falling into that trap, future-proofing starts with dynamic group management. Set up rules that add or remove people based on reliable workplace data, not someone's memory. Build your Power BI data model as a flexible layer with as few hard-coded dependencies as possible. Make your Power Apps smart enough to adapt when group membership changes in real time rather than stalling while admins catch up. One practice that pays off year after year: regularly audit your group memberships and RLS rules to watch for role creep. As organizations shift, people pick up legacy access they no longer need. Left unchecked, this privilege bloat becomes an actual risk, both in terms of security and pure operational messiness. Spot checking and trimming these rights keeps your dashboards lean and lowers the risk of a major data slip. In the end, resilient dashboards only happen when automation carries the weight and modularity is baked into every layer. Manual patches and duplicated logic might work for a tiny team, but at scale, they're just traps waiting to spring. Getting these architecture choices right means you're not just keeping pace with business change, you're building something that's ready for the next pivot, merger, or overnight growth spurt. Given how quickly organizations evolve these days, the real reward is being able to shift from maintaining a tangle of dashboards to running truly adaptive, role-based portals, ready to surface the right data to the right people the moment they need it. And that opens up a whole new dimension of value for your Power Platform investment. If you strip away the visuals and fancy DAX, a dashboard lives or dies based on the layers you never see: identity, security, and user context. That's what builds trust across departments, not another gauge or slicer. Before your next rollout, ask yourself if your dashboards will flex and protect themselves as teams change, or if you're baking in tomorrow's headaches today. I'd love to hear your war stories. What's worked, what's backfired, or what's keeping you up at night with Power Platform projects? Drop your tough scenarios below and keep an eye out. Next round, we'll tackle advanced Power Platform security techniques.